So when we looked at our previous session, it was very demand and supply planning and how do we bring in the price elasticity and then also AI. But I think for us, it's, we don't want to use the word pak because with my Afrikaans maybe you will hear another word. So I will refrain from saying pak all the time. But I think in this session, we're actually honored to have, and believe it or not, government that's sitting with us. So this is for us a very unique panel because we have private sector together with public sector to say how do they care about the supply chain movement and what can we do together. So I'm going to take you through three slides. Then I will hand over to Ian. He's going to take us through what the government have decided to do in the next couple of days. And then Rudy will tell us more in detail why will this initiative be different? Because we need to engage with the President himself every 6 weeks, and there's a cadence of what we need to do with the supply chain. And then lastly, Kulisi is on his way from the airport, and he will just give us a summary of what do we think we as private sector can play a role in, what structures is there that we can play a role in. So thank you for my slides. I think, as you all know, supply chain is not anymore, let I sit in my room isolated. It's more about problem solving and how do I use AI to help me to make sure that I can balance the cost, the effect, and the resilience. So we all seen that, and that's what we experience at Africa currently. It's not one modality above another modality. They play equally together in speed, distance, and also make sure that there's a load capacity. And we can see now with the rail infrastructure that's not performing as it should be, it puts immense pressure on the road infrastructure, and currently we have too many trucks on the road. Just to give you an idea of where is the logistics industry currently, so we just populate for you. In the manganese side, we're moving with the coal, we're moving about 160,000 tons on a daily basis. When we go to our iron ore line, it's about 150,000 tons on a daily basis, and that normally goes via Saldanha Bay. Then you've got your container traffic. You can see there about in Durban, we move between 7,000 to 8,000 containers on a daily basis. Then if you go to Western Cape, where we are, it's about 2,400 containers on a daily basis in and out. Then sadly, if you look at the container or let's say the road corridors, we're moving about 1,800 trucks daily on the N4 corridor to Maputo, which is not built for this type of volume. Then in the Durban and the N3, it's about 9,400 trucks that moves on a daily basis. Then when we go to Walvis Bay, and a lot of media will write about our alternatives, which is Maputo and Walvis Bay. Walvis Bay is not so active. It's about 430 trucks that's moving on a daily basis. Now, you probably say, that's great, Junita, what does that help us? I think it helps us to understand that currently our design capacity or our demonstrated capacity in the different modalities cannot support trade growth. And if it cannot support trade growth, what do we do? I think that's the only 4 pillars that we go on: transparency, collaboration, big data, and more importantly, how do we work with government? I think, and we made it very clear, we're not there to help government. That's not our aim as private sector, but we're there to work in partnership and to work for SA Inc. That's our main purpose, not who's right, who's wrong. It's what do we do for SA Inc. My last one, that's my panelists, and I want to introduce you to them. Ian, he's currently taking the lead, and in the BUSA structure, we work, or B4SA, we have a leader executive, and then we work under a CEO support, which I will come to you now. Then we've got the esteemed Rudy Dix, which is from the President's office. Thank you, Rudy, and we really appreciate you with us. Then you will hear him. It's a man of wisdom. I asked him one day, why is he involved in this? And then he said to me, Junita, what will my grandchildren say if I'm not involved and help our country to find SA Inc. again. Khulisi, thank you.
Can we go back to that slide? I'm the only one that looks like my picture, I see. So having run coal logistics for... No, that's the president's speech. That's not my one. Can we just go back to the start of mine? Is it this one? Is it moving on? Yeah, it's not moving on. Okay. Anyway, having been involved with coal logistics for a very long time, I just want to build on this puck story, because 2 o'clock in the morning, you're sitting there at your phone, somebody phones and says that rail wagons haven't arrived, so I think I'm going to go now. Where the puck is my truck? So, doesn't translate to Afrikaans, so that's what worries me. Yeah, all right. Guys, my name is Ian Bird. I'm fortunate enough to be a member of Organised Business that is going to be working together with government on solving the logistics challenges in the country. I'm privileged enough today to share with you what is really hot off the press, and those that would have read the Sunday papers would see there wasn't a paper that didn't deal with organised businesses' engagements and working together with government. Some of the articles were positive, there were a couple of negative ones, but be that as it may, that everybody's got their own right to their own opinion, but they don't have their right to their own facts. So we've made some remarkable progress in the last 4 months, and I'll share that with you today. The President recognized some time back that there were a number of impediments affecting economic growth, and he then structured what has now been called Operation Vulindlela, which you'll see on the slide, and I'm going to try and stick to the script so that we don't go off the reservation here. It's a joint initiative between the President's Office, Rudy is here, who represents that, and National Treasury, dealing with the network systems in the country, modernize and transform these industries, primarily energy and transport and logistics. These will culminate then, these efforts of Vulindlela culminate in action plans. There's the energy action plan that's already been done and in the process of being implemented. And in our case, or the logistics industry, it's going to be the freight logistics plan, which again you'll hear a bit of later. The great thing about what's happened with Vulindlela is that they did not develop the freight logistics plan in isolation. Business was encouraged, and in fact there was a demand from Vulindlela that business come and share warts and all and get into the weeds of the issues that we face or business faces on the transport and logistics side. So anybody that was a logistics stakeholder had an opportunity to come and present in the development of this freight logistics roadmap. I was fortunate enough to facilitate a number of those sessions with Vulindlela, and I can assure you that there were no holds barred, some really probing questions asked of the industry and their relationship with the various service providers in the country. The sectors that presented, you'll see on the slide, were mining, agriculture, logistics. Juanita herself presented, containers, intermodal, agriculture, literally everybody that had a logistics stake, if you will. Such was the impact of these presentations to Vulindlela that they went and requested that the same presentations be made to the President in early July. And such was the impact there with the President that there were certain meetings held with the CEOs of business thereafter. And literally by the third week in April. Literally in the third week in April, the President announced the National Logistics Crisis Committee, which is really a program of action and to drive the implementation of the freight logistics roadmap, one that I mentioned a few minutes ago. However, as you would have seen from the papers in the weekend, there's still significant pressure intense pressure on delivery, and we need to make some good progress. That culminated last week in the meeting with the President, and we'll touch on that in a minute. We believe, as organised business, that government has responded appropriately, and one of the articles in the paper this morning by Lisa Steyn said probably responded just in time. And we do have the freight logistics roadmap that will be released very shortly, and we have already kicked off the National Logistics Crisis Committee. So now that we've caught the bus as business, what do? It's impossible for everybody that's got a problem with logistics or a challenge in logistics to go and be present in the NLCC, in the National Logistics Crisis Committee. So business has decided to form, in a unique partnership amongst ourselves, a collaboration under the auspices of Business for South Africa, B4SA. This was the same structure that worked so successfully together with the government in the implementation of the COVID response and the vaccinations. We need to cohesively harness the solutions to address these supply chain challenges and to drive the implementation to reverse the current situation. So the appeal from organised business to every logistics stakeholder in the country is join together, integrate the solutions across road, rail, terminals, ports, and come together as one, as a cohesive response and participation in the National Logistics Crisis Committee. As I've said, it would be incredibly unwieldy if everybody that had a gripe about logistics ended up going to the National Logistics Crisis Committee. So the appeal is from organised business, and clearly some logistics stakeholders are not members and are not represented in the organised business structures, BUSA and BLSA and others. But the appeal is that through the organised and this unique collaboration, that we will take the inputs and we will make sure that these are heard at the National Logistics Crisis Committee. So we need a cohesive and tightly managed response. We will not be gatekeepers, so clearly somebody that is not satisfied with what we're doing as organised business in our representation on the NLCC has a right to make their voices heard, but we endeavour to ensure that everybody's voice is heard and carried through to the NLCC. We then worked over the last week, or 2 weeks actually, on key interventions that we put through a strategic filter together with Operation Vulindlela. These are initiatives or interventions where business can add value to help to implement and work together with government. It can be done in a shorter space of time as possible, and the impact is significant. So presently we've agreed on 6 priority areas. These are now in the public domain after last week. And there will be a focus on supply chains, key supply chains, and a focus on the security of the various trade corridors and networks. So we've aligned now with NLCC and the Business for South Africa initiative. This is the focus then, the objective of these 6 priority projects: improve the efficiency of the freight logistics system. Our initial areas: deploy the intervention teams to improve the operational performance on the rail corridors with a focus on security, increase the availability of rolling stock, replace aging port equipment, develop a network statement which gives private operators the wherewithal to operate on the network, and a standard access agreement which will deal with third-party access, finalize a private sector participation framework so that private sector can meaningfully contribute to solutions and not feel that they are just depositing money into an endless black hole. Therefore, you need a framework. And then lastly, and something that business felt very strongly about and requested Operation Vulindlela to include this as a priority project, is to put intervention teams to improve the road transport operations and the border transit. We are responsible as business for contracting transporters, for moving goods by road, and therefore I think it's incumbent upon ourselves to take some responsibility and deal with this proactively, dealing with the safety of the assets, the drivers, the cargo, dealing with the safe operations, and then dealing with the congestions. And we're going to focus on 3 trade corridors on the N2, the N3, and the N4. So this is where we are right now. Literally, this all happened last week, as you will have heard and you would have read about in the papers. We are really going to push ahead. We've already had 2 meetings of the NLCC, and from my perspective, and having been involved in logistics since I can't even remember when, I'm encouraged by what is coming out from the government side, from the Operation Vulindlela initiatives, and now from the National Logistics Crisis Committee. There's a lot of work to be done. This is not going to happen overnight, but I'm committed. We've pulled in a whole lot of private sector experts who have jumped at the opportunity to participate, and I'm incredibly positive about the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. I'm sure, Rudy, you can take the stand. And we're honored to have you from the President's office. Thank you.
Morning. Thanks, Juanita. Morning. I heard someone said earlier on that someone from government is coming in, and that person will be answering all the questions. I'm certainly hope that's not going to be the case, because there will be a long list of questions, and I would have to spend quite a bit of time having to answer some difficult questions. But I'm here still, and I will answer difficult questions if that's the case. I think perhaps building on Ian's point, and I slightly have a different focus, because I think it's been an amazing journey. When we started off with Operation Vulindlela in 2020, this was during COVID, we launched this, and Vulindlela really means opening up, for those who don't know. It was some of the long-standing structural constraints to economic growth that we needed to focus on. Sometimes these are very difficult issues, because they relate to primarily areas within the network sector. So we focus on 5 areas. The 5 areas was energy, electricity, water, particularly bulk water, and you'll see some of the announcements that we've made around what use licenses, hulas, and infrastructure agencies, and a whole set of different things. Telecommunications, for some of you who see telecommunications as an important part of your sector, you know that we had to, for between 10 and 14 years, we did not auction off the spectrum that we have, which was the remaining 4G and 5G spectrum. And that had actually happened. Visa and the visa reforms that are here, you will see that some of the significant changes that have been made. And then most importantly, which affects yours, is the efficiencies in the port and rail sector. Now, a lot of the work that we have focused on is specifically not the broader logistics sector, so I must qualify that. It is specifically on getting efficiency in the main network sectors, and that's in rail and port. And so this presentation does focus quite a bit on what we talk about, the roadmap for accelerated reform, efficiency, and growth. So I'll try and do it as quickly as possible, as Ian has done. I mean, it's just, if you talk about freight rail, right, so many of you rely on that because it's part of your system of getting stuff from one point to another point, and particularly getting it outside of the country or inside, as it's imported. But we've been able to have some significant challenges. We all know that's an integral part of our system, but we've been having some significant underperformance, particularly from a state-owned logistics network. So no matter what, even if you have as much as possible on the road, you still have to connect with the state entity, with Transnet, and that's quite important because it's integrally part of the logistics system. And of course, what we've seen is a significant deterioration and competitiveness of our exports. More than a quarter of long-distance freight traffic has shifted to road in the past 5 years, despite government's announcement that we want to see the shift from road to rail. And that, of course, has a whole set of different consequences on it: destruction of the road network, higher costs, user pay principles, people complaining about e-tolls and who pays for that. That's quite a significant area. And then, of course, from a port system, there's a whole set of different international comparative studies that show how inefficient our ports are. We rank at the bottom of 351 ports that have been surveyed, for example, by the World Bank. So, of course, this is important for us to develop a more consistent intervention to deal with it. There are two things that we focus on, as Ian has spoken about. The one is a short-term intervention, and so the National Logistics Crisis Committee talks to that. A lot of the short-term interventions are trying to improve port performance. And there's a second component that runs in parallel. This is the larger reform, or what we refer to as a roadmap. You may ask, why do they want to develop a roadmap? It's very important because it's at the heart of how we see the sector and the role it plays, including the role of the state, private sector, and the role of transit in that. So it's very similar to the way we've developed the roadmap for Eskom. If many of you would remember that, in 2019, we took a decision around this, and specifically, you'll see some of the reforms that have come through. So it's quite critical for us to be able to look at it in that context going forward. The causes of that is numerous, as many of you may know, and I'm not going to go through all of it, but unfunded mandates, essential facilities, governance, legacy of state capture and governance issues have also been quite an important part of that. So what is our short to medium term? Because it relates to those themes that Ian had spoken about, right? So there are 4 areas that we specifically have been working on, right? That is improving operational performance. That relates to addressing theft and vandalism of the rail network. Operational improvements on the key corridors, independent assessments of the root causes and interventions to improve that. Creating a level playing field, because that's quite important if you want to have non-discriminatory access and non-discriminatory pricing, particularly for those who want to participate in the rail or in the ports, because that's quite critical for us. And for us is separating infrastructure from operations. That's a difficult thing, right? As you can imagine, we've had an entity very similar to Eskom that operates across the entire system, vertically integrated system. What we're trying to do is separate that to allow for the leveling of the playing fields. Publish a network statement, as Ian had referred to earlier, because that's quite important if you want to introduce competition. And then, of course, establishing a rolling stock company, because that's going to be quite critical for us. The economic transport regulator is going to be quite critical for us, and that's part of a process that's going to regulate. We don't have a regulator in the sector to be able to deal with that. And then sustainability of the network going forward. So this is part of as I said, 2 interventions, short-term and the kind of medium to long-term, to be able to see the fundamental shifts and changes in the way that we want to see this sector operating. Then, of course, a whole set of interventions that we've got a team together, Professor Jan Havinga, many of you may know him, Jaap van der Merwe, Sarah Truwen, and of course, Ian from the private sector and many of his colleagues over there, Mkolisi, who's been driving it from a senior level, have been quite critical in trying to support and working with Transnet around how we deal with the rail underperformance. And again, there's a whole set of different interventions over here, and I've referred to many of that. And of course, the importance of setting up those technical teams, as Ian had spoken about. This is a bit of a busy slide, but thanks to Jaap van der Merwe and Jan Havinga, we try to show that we do understand, right? So sometimes we mouth off, but we actually want to understand the problem, so we're able to finalize it. Now, Jaap designed this nice, interesting slide, and it draws an analogy for someone in the hospital, right? So red is trauma unit, orange is ICU, yellow is high care, and of course, green is general ward. I mean, as you can see, all of that is in ICU, right? That's the reality, right? That's the reality that we face. A large chunk of it is ICU and trauma unit and ICU, of course, trauma unit and ICU. So you've got a lot of work ahead of us. And if you simply use the rail network that we are talking about in dealing with inefficiencies, you're going to have to do it by corridor. And that's literally the kind of work that we're going to try and focus on, right? So you'll see what Ian was referring to, the National Logistics Crisis Committee. And to show the seriousness of this, the NLCC is chaired by the President of the country. That's quite important. It's chaired by the President of the country. It has the key ministers that are involved in the logistics sector attending, and it has also the key CEOs led by Mkolisi Mokhoja, who will be there, right? The NLCC Technical Committee, this will be run by the DG in the presidency, my colleague, she's the director, my boss and colleague. And then we'll have Operation Vulindlela Secretariat, which I run, and we'll be doing the Secretariat support going forward. Now, if you see, this is the kind of interventions that we refer to when we talk about those specific interventions that Ian had put up around the very first areas of what we refer to. And we've done it by corridor, so it's the iron ore export corridor, it's the coal export corridor, container corridor, and other corridors. And why we've done it by corridor, as you well may know, because this is the biggest export earner, you know, so minerals and metals remains the biggest component of our exports earning, 51% of our total export basket. And it's why it's such an important area that we're able to get that efficiency right, but at the same time also deal with some of the constraints that you face when you have to enter into this. And so, of course, this is really what we're going to deal with it. We're going to take it into hospital, and we're going to segment it into different parts of the wards that are there, and have a team working on it in a very technical and granular details to be able to address it. And I think that's important. So it's not going to be superficial, as Ian says. It's going to be genuine. We're getting the right set of experts. We're bringing in the right private sector individuals into it to be able to talk through this. And my last slide, sorry, Juanita, for this. Okay? So when we talk about structural reform, of course, many people think through, and particularly my colleagues in the unions may think, okay, well, what are you talking about? Are you privatizing? And we're not really privatizing. What we're asking for is greater participation of the private sector in the industry, and that's going to be quite pertinent for us to be able to get right. So, again, rail network and operational ports are national assets and needs to be managed to maximize social benefits. We can't run away from that, right? So the design of Transnet, TFR, and many of the SOEs remains a developmental objective, but it has to level the playing fields to allow for private sector participation on some of the networks, for example, rail networks, where they don't participate, for example, right? Competition is a tool to achieve efficiency, very important principle. Public service obligations, defined and monitored and separately funded, that's going to be quite critical. Competitive neutrality framework for state-owned firms in competitive markets, and here we're trying to introduce that, and it's going to be quite critical. So you can't have, and I know colleagues from Transnet is here, you can't have Transnet being the referee and the player, right? And that's why separation of infrastructure is pertinent when we spoke about that, and the creation of an infrastructure manager. It's like a transmission company, for example, in Eskom. I always draw this analogy. So transmission, if you want to create a competitive generation space for electricity, you can't have a transmission entity that in the long run will remain in Eskom. It has to be separate so that it is able to buy power, it is able to create a competitive market space, day-ahead markets, in the same way that an infrastructure manager that many of you may know from other global markets is separated. It will eventually have to come out of Transnet. It would allow for operations of different players, including Transnet operations, onto the rail network going forward. And then private investment should be facilitated, but access to private infrastructure may then need to be required. So, of course, no free lunch, right? So that's the case. So, Juanita, I think this is just giving you a sense of enhancing and showing that we do understand the challenges is quite significant. We want to work with the private sector. That's the role that we've been playing. We think it's going to be quite critical for us to be able to get this right. It is a major, major focus for the next few months. We have to fix this in this year, by the way. So this is not for the next 3-4 years. Some of it is longer term. But, for example, if you talk about the infrastructure manager, I'm sorry, I know we're going to have question time. We talk about the infrastructure manager. We've been working with Transnet on this, and we think that we may get an infrastructure, well, not may, we want to have that infrastructure manager operational and set up by the end of October during the course of this year, which means we can issue a network statement. I think that's also going to be quite important because it goes hand in hand. It's quite critical for us to be able to do that. And a whole set of other interventions, the port space also, including, for example, third-party access, which is quite critical. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rudy. Yes, we do have rail colleagues in the audience, so again, when it comes to question time, they will ask you probably a lot of questions. So, Khaleesi, can we hand over to you just to give us your experience on that you semi-retired and don't want to leave us?
Thank you very much. I am really feeling very honored and privileged to be here this morning. I almost didn't make it. Logistics issues. Logistics issues. Well, let me first make a correction. It says, there was a slide here which says, Mxolisi Mgojo, Exaro CEO. Well, unless I'm accused, I don't want to be accused of ruling from the grave. I'm retired. I'm a former Exaro CEO who was in retirement until about 3 months ago. And I thought, okay, I'll be on semi-retirement. I can come in and sort of support. I'm permanently back at work. It is indeed an honor to be with you today, just to thank you for allowing me to participate in this very, very important and a critical session. And I am talking to you at a time that is really deeply concerning for South Africa, both from an economic and a social perspective, but especially for us here today from the viewpoint of our entire transport and logistics value chain. Like many of you, I passionately, and I want to say this word, passionately, believe in the potential of South Africa. And probably that is why I'm back here again. I also believe that our government has some robust policies that have been put in place. Some are in the process of being implementing. Some of them are in the creation that Rodri has been talking about. And therefore, as much that things may seem to have been slow in terms of implementation, but really we've got to accept and acknowledge the fact that there has been also a lack of critical resources in some of these entities that we are trying to support. They have been hollowed out, some of these resources, and really it is our obligation as business that we have had to step in. I think we all agree that we urgently need to increase the pace of delivery to avoid irreversible decline of SA Inc. In view of all of this, it is very pleasing that in the last week, the South African government and organized business met on the 6th of June and have jointly agreed to urgently establish and advance its partnership for engagement to remove obstacles to inclusive economic growth and job creation. This event last week was unusual and unprecedented to some degree. Under the umbrella of BUSA and B4SA, CEOs of South Africa's largest companies from all sectors have come together in a coordinated and committed way to work together urgently. And when I say urgently, Rudy did show a schematic, or was it Ian? I'm not sure, but they said that the president is the chair of this program that we are all driving for. And guess what? We are meeting him every 6 weeks for a report back. Second meeting happened last week, and in 6 weeks, we're going to have to tell him what we've done between the last meeting and the next meeting. That's how urgent the matter is. We are committing to contributing considerable skills and resources, and as a matter of urgency, work through all relevant partnership structures to address our country's priorities. At that meeting, business leaders shared a pledge with the president that signifies business's strong commitment and support to reversing the current economic climate and build a solid future together. And I just want to read this pledge for you, because this is a serious pledge that we are committing to. It reads as follows. As South African business leaders, we believe in the potential of our country, are committed to building it, and have come together to address the current challenges in order to achieve sustainable and inclusive growth. We believe that through partnership and focused interventions, we can make a significant and a positive impact on our country and create hope for all South Africans. We are committed to being the force of good. On the 7th of June, which was the day after our engagement with the President, we had a report back to the country's big top CEOs. That morning at 7 o'clock, we had over 200 CEOs who were there, committing to this pledge, committing to the resources, committing to the skills, committing to the finance, eager and waiting to actually do what we did very well at the most critical crisis that we have ever faced as a country. In actual fact, it was a global crisis, where at the beginning of that crisis, the COVID crisis, we were being written off as a country, as a basket case, that we would never be able to pull it off. Reuters, Bloomberg, they all painted this bleak and negative outlook about our country and our ability to respond. And yet, at the end of it all, we were recognized by WHO as the fourth best country that dealt with the crisis, as the fourth best. Why? Because we made a decision as South Africans that we're going to come together. Because if we didn't, we're all going to sink together. And this is the fact that has propelled us to take this initiative with the same rigor as we did at that time. And we're going to succeed. And therefore, South Africans do desperately need a beacon of hope. Man, it is dark. It feels very dark right now. It's despair. Sometimes I don't even want to read the paper. Sometimes I even tell my wife, please don't tell me the problem, okay? I know the problem. You know I'm lying here next to you telling you what we are trying to do with the problem. So we need a guiding light towards the repair and the restoration. And South African business, we believe, is ideally placed not only to provide that hope, but also to ensure the delivery of the many plans needed for change, as has been highlighted here. This, of course, talks to our future, as well as the future of the next generation, and how this collaboration is the best interest for accelerated economic growth, inclusivity, job creation. And therefore, how we get to this future, it may seem impossible to some. But as we have seen, it will occur primarily through the already established, in this particular instance, in this stream. Remember, there are three streams. There's energy, transport and logistics, crime and corruption. They all work hand in hand. Oh yeah, by the way, it's not a fluke that you're not experiencing as much shoulder-leading in the last week or two. It's not a fluke, all right? There's been a lot of work that is happening behind the scene. And therefore, we believe that with this work, working with Operation Vule and the team, we will succeed. There may not be always clear, visible signs. So I just want to help you understand that. The problem that we are dealing with here took years in the making, okay? And so I can understand when people saying nothing is happening. I can understand when people saying, yeah, but there's been committees upon committees, crisis, what this and that, but nothing seems to be happening. But I can assure you, there are men and women behind the scenes, not being visible, working to try and get these things right. And we do recognize that in this instance, like we did with the COVID pandemic, communication is going to be very critical in all of this. Constant communication, giving everybody the country feedback on a regular basis, what we said we're going to do, where we are, how are we going about in terms of a scorecard, and if things are not coming right and the slippages, also coming back and communicate. And in that way, I believe that we will start earning the trust by being more transparent. Grit, resilience, innovation, performance. These are just some of the qualities that make many South African business people respected and really sought after around the world. You should go to many countries and see how many CEOs, global CEOs, that emanate from this country. Okay, Elon Musk, well, we can claim him from time to time, but you know what? It depends on the day, on how you see him, you know. But we must strive for a collective reset and double down on our ongoing efforts to help drive this necessary repair that is so desperately needed. The role players in South Africa, business always standing firm on the deck, but I should not just say business only. We all should be standing ready on the deck. Ladies and gentlemen, this is our country. I have children. I have grandchildren. The mess happened in our watch. In our watch, we were there. You can't claim that in the last 10, 15 years you were not around. I mean, some of you are still baby boomers, but I don't know. Or the next Y generation. But we were there. What are you going to say to your children? They are busy going overseas now. They have lost hope. Party to that is us telling them this country is a basket case. You better go. For your sake, for your future. What are we going to leave our grandchildren behind? I've got 2 grandchildren. Each time I look at them, I say, my goodness, if I stand on the side being an armchair critic, always throwing the stone, the boat is sinking. It's going to sink with me. I'm busy complaining to those who are trying to row it. What the heck is going on, you guys? Where is your time to take the paddle, to plug the hole, and to row the boat so that we can live a better future for our children and our grandchildren? Because if we don't do that, believe you me, they will stand on your tombstone on that day and say, thank you very much for leaving this mess for us. It's our collective responsibilities, ladies and gentlemen. And so let us not squander this moment, because this moment is upon us. So I always laugh when I listen to critics, people who are very good at telling you what's wrong, how bad things are, change this government, what. The boat is sinking right now. What are you doing? And so with that, I wasn't here to come and lecture you or preach to you guys. Okay? But I just wanted to get to a sense of what we are confronted with and what it calls of all of us, our collective responsibility. Not just business, not just government, but we have society at large. What is your response to supporting democracy, the rule of law? That is what, as an ordinary citizen, you can be galvanizing yourselves around doing. There is no room for anybody who says, well, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I don't know where to play. There's many places to play. Find your space. The future of this country depends on you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kolisi. I think what we'll do, maybe if there's 1 or 2 questions from the audience, can I see the raise of hands? And then we will give you a microphone. Are you stunned into silence? Or do you think we match the minerals with the health in an incorrect way? So please, if you can give us a question.
So let me get it started, because this is a question in my head and maybe some of you are afraid to ask it. So my question is, how is there going to be governance around the spend and the contributions of the private sector together with the government to make sure that the funds are going in the right place and being used well?
That's a very, very pertinent question that you're asking. And it is the same question we asked ourselves as business at the time that we had to deal with the COVID crisis. Because we recognize, and we're not blind to the fact that there is rampant corruption that's in the system. And so therefore, in that instance, you will recall we created the Solidarity Fund as business, a separate fund with a separate governance structures and a board under the auspices of BUSA. The procurement was done through that fund, and whatever that had been bought was then given back to the state to administer. Some of them actually went to the organizations like Discoveries and others, Discams, who were also driving the process of the vaccination process. In this instance, Rudy can talk about the RMF, the Resource Mobilization Fund, that has been also established by business to do exactly the same thing for the NECOM structure, the National Energy Crisis Committee structure. Go ahead.
Thanks, Kolisi. Yes. So what we have, in partnership with business, is set up what we refer to as the Resource Mobilization Fund. The fund was initially set up to support the work around NECOM, which is the National Energy Crisis Committee, and the implementation of what the President announced in July, which was the Energy Action Plan. Not going to go through that. But in setting up the Resource Mobilization Fund, molded very much on the lines that we've did with Solidarity, was a whole set of commitments from philanthropies, from different business organizations, a large chunk of that we were able to mobilize close on to 100 million rand. How does the funding flow? Because I think that's quite important. Let's start with the governance first. So again, what they've done, they've set up an independent board, right? They've registered it as an entity, right? And there are various governance structures in place. What flows? It's not funding that flows, because I think that's important, and particularly for ourselves as government. I think it's quite critical if you think about it. You know, do you want to allocate money, or do you require resource, a technical resource? And so the terms are quite clear as to how and what flows from the Resource Mobilization Fund. And that's partly to protect ourselves, right? But it's partly also to ensure that the governance structures are correct. And so what flows is a technical resource that is paid for by the private sector to assist us in meeting a particular set of needs. So let's just say in this NLCC, the business colleagues have now agreed that the Resource Mobilization Fund that was initially for the energy will be extended to the logistics sector as well. So I think that's really good, and I think we should congratulate them for that, because I think that's quite important. But let's just say you need a logistics expert or a modeler. Now, they would not give us the money for that, but they would ask us to suggest, or they would procure through a call for proposals. So generally through a proper, procurement process, and they would then appoint someone, and that person would then work with us on the resources that is required. So it's not the flow of money, it's an arm's length relationship where technical capacity is provided and paid for by the Resource Mobilization Fund to support the technical work of the NLCC. So I hope that is quite clear. So anyone that says, oh, it's money flowing and, we're not going to, we don't, we have a, over the whole kind of relationship, we don't know what happens. We only ask for a technical support. And if we need a Juanita, for example, And we'll say, well, we need a person like Juanita, and they would find someone and they would give the person to us. So I think it's quite important to understand it in that way. And the way that works from a resource mobilization fund is a separate arm's length relationship. We have no interference in the governance structure. We have no interference with the board. We have no interference on the different committees that have to work and appoint whoever is being procured. That decision is entirely and rests with the resource mobilization fund.
Kulisi, do you want to add to that, or are you?
Yeah, I mean, at this point in time, if we can just share that as part of capacitating the NLCC from both sides, we are sitting with Rudy, Prof there, we are saying, all right, for each of these work streams that are there, what are going to be the critical skills that we're going to need as business? Because remember, we're coming to the table with government on the other side in the NLCC on the table. And we have to make sure the government side has got equal capacity and capability in terms of skills. So we're going to help them through this fund, make sure that they are capacity. So we're busy now working through every single one of these work streams to every single area, unpacking it to say what skills are required for this, for that, and for that. Do you guys have the skills? If you can't have the skills, there's a process for you with that we can get the skills. Whilst we're also mobilizing ourselves so that when we get to the table and do the actual nitty-gritty work, that we are equally matched in terms of skills and capabilities to enable for us to achieve the objectives and the outcomes that are required. So that is how this is going to work. It's going to be hands-on. It's going to be highly technical. It's going to have dates and milestones and dates, because every 6 weeks, we're going to have to go through a structure, through a joint strategic operations committee comprising on one side of the ministers, their DGs, and also Transnet, Eskom also there. And on the other side, it's going to be business, and we're going to be collectively having to go and present to the president every 6 weeks, the work that's been done. That's how serious this is.
Maybe, MJ, as a commitment, next year when we have again the SAPICS South Conference, we will have that slide of Rudy Dix that Jaap van der Merwe have done to indicate if we are now in the high care, the ICU, or the general ward, because I think we want to be accountable. We as business doesn't want to let this opportunity go.
The patient has to go home now. Can't be in the hospital anymore.
Not even general ward, right? So we have to get them out of the hospital completely, right? They need to be going home.
So I think, colleagues, with this, I'm going to wrap up, because I think if you don't have hope in your heart, I'm not sure what will give hope in your heart, but to have this accountability and to promise that we will come next year back to you and indicate where we are is phenomenal. And allow me to thank our panelists, because you don't know that, but they woke up early. Kulisi was flying this morning from Johannesburg, landing in the rainy weather. Rudy made special arrangements because he's based in Johannesburg, and the same with Ian Bird. So I think we're really privileged to have them today, understand, and you can mingle with them if you break, ask them the questions. And Rudy made a firm commitment that you can ask him any question and he will answer. So thank you very much, and we conclude this session, and hopefully you will enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you very much.